Hello to wherever you are in the world. This week our attention remains on Scotland as we discuss whisky. Vicky not only talks us through the history of whisky, but the culture that surrounds it. It should also be mentioned that Vicky's business partner Charles McLean is the world's leading whisky expert, so we're in extremely capable hands. Just to give you a little tease, this podcast includes ancient Egypt, royalty, and intoxicated angels. Welcome back, Vicky, to Low Season Traveller Insider Guides. So we're staying on the theme of Scotland, but this time we're going in depth and we're talking about whisky. So I thought we'd talk a little bit about your company, where you work, then how whisky ties in with culture, and then how to really enjoy whisky. But I did want to start off by settling a family debate, because this is something that goes on in our family and it needs to end. So my granddad was an Irishman through and through. He loved his whisky and he argued that whisky was born and came from Ireland, not Scotland. Are you able to settle the debate and tell me where whisky originates from?
I'm not sure I am really, actually, and I'm also half Irish. So impartial. Actually, the ancient Egyptians they knew the principles of distillation whenever that was, a long time ago. So the credit really actually goes to them. But apparently, the ancient Egyptians didn't drink it; they made perfume with it. So I think maybe they made perfume. We thought, oh, let's have a taste of that. Yeah. It was brought to Scotland and Ireland, I think, about the same time by monks. And the monks had been in Europe, and they'd certainly been drinking wine, but obviously there are no grapes in Scotland, and they started using grain. But then at the same time, they say that the distillation of grain originally was for medicinal purposes. So I'm not really sure. Again, it's like, when did they start drinking this? This is medicine. Let's have a little quick swally of that. But I think it's kind of equal credit.
Yeah, I was going to say, that sounds like a draw to me. That will settle the feud. If you just go, we're all winners. It was all there first. It's all fine. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so going on to where you work. So you work with a company called McLean and Bruce, and you pride yourself on providing luxury experiences that combine whisky and Scottish heritage. So why have you guys chosen whisky? What's so important about whisky to Scotland?
Well, it's interesting, actually, because even though whisky probably did come to Scotland and Ireland at exactly the same time, it's not automatically, it is obviously associated with Ireland, but not in quite the same way as it is in Scotland. And it could just be the sheer volume that was produced or is produced in Scotland. We've got, I think at the moment, over 130 distilleries. And because it's been made here for centuries, it's always played a really important role in the economy. And I guess there's also the element of just people being complete whisky fanatics, you know, who doesn't love the finished product. So we get a lot of people coming specifically for investment or buying to add to collections, or as a pilgrimage, really. They just want to go and see, you know, maybe they're from America and they're famous for distilleries, Macallan, and they want to go to that. You know, it's like hallowed ground to them.
Yeah.
And most of the distilleries that are the bigger names, they were all built in 18th and 19th century, so you know, and they're fairly unchanged, really. The methods and even the buildings haven't really changed in a couple of hundred years. So yeah, going back is really some kind of pilgrimage for people.
So they're almost like a time warp. If you go and see a distillery or go and learn about how they're made, it's almost like a bit of history is captured, because it's not, like you said, it's not changed in so many years.
It really hasn't. I mean, everything about the whiskey industry, there are modern technologies, but pretty much everything about them is hundreds of years old. I mean, it's silly things like, when you've got a cask of whiskey, there's the bung, which is like a cork in the side of it, which stops, you know, it's how you get the whiskey in and out.
Yeah.
And to open it, you have a big wooden hammer and you bang on either side of the bung, and the bung pops out. And it's stupid things. You know, that's just one really stupid example of something that just hasn't changed for hundreds of years. But it's a little thing, but you know, it's all these things. They are unchanged.
Yeah, and it's the little things that make up a tradition, a culture, a practice, and and then, like you said, I think that does really come into whiskey and how it's made, isn't it? On your website, you say you were asked to organise a high-spec whiskey tour for a member of the royal family. Are you allowed to disclose who that was?
I am. It's actually not a British royal family member. It's how the company started. Actually, it was in 2013. My business partner Charlie and I were asked to help organise a whisky tour of Scotland for Prince Albert of Monaco and his wife and their friends. So we did that, and it was helicopters and castles and lots of lovely whisky and food and things. And about 2 o'clock in the morning, over a bottle of whiskey, we decided this would be a very good idea for a company. And that was kind of how the company started. We thought, there must be a market for people who are looking for this, rather than jumping on the tour bus with everybody else. My business partner Charlie is the world's leading whisky authority. He's published 19 books. But it gives us, we've got amazing access into the whisky industry, so we're really lucky to be able to offer our guests what they're able to do through us.
That's incredible. And I kind of feel like you guys align with the low season traveller ethos in the fact that you want a tailored experience for people that take them slightly away from the crowds and off the beaten track. How do you guys do that? How do you make sure that you're providing an authentic experience without it being overpopulated or so busy that you can't really enjoy it?
That's a really good point, and it also actually fits into the whole sort of the whole kind of COVID bubble idea as well, because what we do is essentially extremely antisocial. We have guests who are looking for privacy and discretion and security. They don't just bundle onto a tour with everybody else. Doing those things is actually easier off season anyway, and it's much more relaxing for everybody. And take a distillery as a good example. They're able to get more time and more attention and better care because people aren't rushed off their feet. So it has lots of advantages.
Yeah, amazing. And going back to the origins of the business, it's all about luxury. Has whiskey always been considered a luxury item?
No, absolutely not. It's quite an interesting question because it's certainly considered a luxury item now. There are now lots of whiskey investment funds for bottles and casks and sell for millions now, but which people who are serious whiskey drinkers find that rather depressing, because it's actually putting whiskey out of reach of people who want to enjoy the whiskey. But actually, beer has been around for, I think it's 5,000 years, and it is the third most popular drink in the world, I believe, after water and tea. So beer was always drunk because the water, you couldn't really drink the water because it was contaminated. And cognac was hugely popular in Britain. But then in the 18th century, phylloxera wiped out grape harvests and whiskey became very popular really for the first time. But no, it wasn't considered a luxury until relatively recently.
Oh, and that's interesting actually that you say, beer was drunk instead of water because it was actually safer. Whiskey's actually got the nickname the water of life. Do you know where that phrase came from?
I do, and yeah, I'm 90% sure I'm right. So when the monks who were distilling in the Middle Ages, they called it the water of life. I'm not sure why, which is aqua vitae in Latin. So it's called aqua vitae, and the translation into Gaelic is uskaba, which is the first part of that is uska, which then sort of got bastardized into whiskey.
Oh, amazing!
The route it came through. Leave.
Really cool. So whiskey, like you said, it's almost become like a collectibles item, and that's because you can get different variations of whiskey that have aged for a certain amount of time. Is there a set period that a whiskey needs to be aged for?
There are quite a lot of laws regulating what you can and can't do with whiskey. And one of those laws is that the minimum age of a whiskey must be 3 years. So the new make spirit is put into wood, and the cask has to have been used before for bourbon or sherry or Oloroso or whatever. And that's where the majority of the flavour comes from, is actually the wood that the whiskey is put in, because when it goes in as new make spirit, it's a clear liquid and it doesn't have sort of a whiskey flavour. But there's no upper limit on what's acceptable. Age is really, it is really important, but it's not a guarantee of quality. So you can get some pretty old whiskies, but it doesn't mean that they're any good.
That's a good bit of advice, actually, because I would have assumed the older the whiskey, the better it was.
Yeah, I think a lot of people do make that assumption. Everybody's got their own personal taste of style of whiskey they enjoy drinking, what kind of wood it's been matured in, whether it's peated or non-peated. But you can get some very young whiskey, which is really quite exciting because of the type of cask it's been matured in.
Okay, so that actually leads me nicely on to my next question about how the whiskey is actually made, because I don't mean this to sound rude, but if you've been to one distillery, haven't you seen them all? Are they all the same, or does each distillery offer something different?
I kind of agree with you to a certain point. The process is always the same. The equipment is always the same. But then where I would disagree with that is that the character of each distillery is really different. So the process might be the same, but the views, the smells, the look, the feel, the wood, the shiny copper, the atmosphere are all completely different. Does that help?
Yeah, that does help. And actually, I'm going to jump to one of my last questions and ask you, what would your top 3 distilleries be then, as like from a personal point of view, where you think you get the best from the people, the smells, and the experience?
So, God, there's so many to choose from. It's really, really difficult. The actual still houses themselves, there are lots of really very cool ones. There's Scotland's smallest distillery is called Daft Mill, and it's owned by an extremely charming farmer called Francis. And it is tiny, and it's just so adorable that I love Daft Mill. The Clydeside distillery in Glasgow is one I'm going to put up there because it's most still houses traditionally have sort of amazing dramatic views, and there are just too many to choose from because they are all spectacular. But the Glasgow, the Clydeside distillery's got a really amazing one, looks up the River Clyde. And then my husband makes whiskey, so I have to choose the whiskey distillery that he's a manager of. It is in the most beautiful part of Scotland, which is called Ardnamurchan. It's a peninsula, and it's the most westerly part of Britain, and it is absolutely beautiful. And that's a gorgeous distillery. Off the beaten track.
That sounds amazing. And of course, you have to mention his. That would be rude not to.
I do. Bit of nepotism never went amiss.
Yeah, exactly. No, they sound fantastic. Actually, it makes me want to go and visit them. You've sold me, and I'm not a massive whiskey drinker. So going on to myself, I don't actually drink that much whiskey, and I find the whole whiskey thing quite intimidating. So what would be your advice for anybody that's new to whiskey? Is there any particular brand or flavors, or and like almost like a beginner's guide to whiskey?
The best advice really actually again comes from my business partner Charlie. He would tell you that you need to find a bar with a decent supply of whiskey and a knowledgeable barman. And so his method is very simple. You start with three whiskies. One is a peated, one is a maybe a sherry cask, and one is perhaps a lowland, which is a bit lighter in flavour. So those are 3 different styles and 3 different regions. And you possibly won't like the peated one because that's kind of it's more common for newcomers to whiskey to not really go for peated. And then so out of the one that you like best, then you break that down, so that style and that region, until you find one that suits you. Don't give up on it.
I won't. Is there a correct way to drink whiskey then? Because you hear about people swilling the edge, sniffing it, running it through your mouth, watering it down, putting it with ice. Like, how should I drink whiskey?
There are 2 ways of drinking whiskey. One is for appreciation and one is for enjoyment. So if you are doing whiskey appreciation, then there are rules which you ought to stick to. That if you're drinking for pleasure, you must do what you want. For an example, ice will really lock down the flavours. If you think about brandy or red wine, how you hold it in your hand, and that's why the glass has been designed that shape, it's because the warmth actually helps release the flavours. It's the same with whiskey. If you put ice in it, you'll just lock the flavours down. But if you're in a hot country, ice in your whiskey is very nice.
Going down the line of appreciation and appreciating whiskey, are there any certain words or whiskey jargon that's used that you could perhaps decipher for us?
I think probably everybody's favourite whiskey jargon, or the thing that we probably get asked to explain the most, is about the angel's share. To sort of give you an idea, when a cask is maturing in a warehouse, it loses about 2% of the alcohol, which evaporates through the wood. Nobody's really entirely sure how this happens. From each cask per year, it's about 2% of the alcohol, which in the whiskey industry in Scotland equates to about 29 million gallons of whiskey lost per year. So it's quite substantial. And then as the alcohol evaporates off, the alcohol by volume in the cask goes down. So what will start off in a cask as maybe 65% strength alcohol will reduce year by year. So if it drops below 40%, then it can no longer be sold as whiskey. So actually, an older whiskey you do need to keep an eye on it, or it'll drop below 40%. So yeah, the angels are quite greedy wee things, because if a cask sits in a warehouse for 20 years, it'll lose about 40% of its alcohol, of its spirit. So and that's the volume, not just the alcohol content. So it's quite a significant part of the maturation process.
Wow, I did not know that. I've heard the angels share mentioned, but again, I wasn't really sure what it was. But yeah, that's, like you said, if nobody's got any idea where that goes, that's quite interesting actually. It is really like angels have come along and gone,
I know, it's really
I'll have a little sip. Now I've got images of like drunk angels.
Scottish angels.
Moving on to you personally, have you got a favourite type of whiskey or a favourite brand? And if so, could you describe it to us?
I'm asked this question an awful lot, and I give one story to answer this question. So we went camping, and it was the August bank holiday weekend, and it was like horizontal sleet. The weather was horrific, absolutely dreadful. We were all absolutely soaked, and we lit the fire, and because everything was so wet, the fire was really, really smoking, and there was water. You know, when you're so wet, water is just pouring off the end of your nose. It was that kind of just, so bad that it was just really, really funny. And we could only get one radio station that was playing some really quite appalling traditional Scottish music, so it was very atmospheric indeed. And my husband produced a bottle of whiskey, which is a whiskey that I don't normally enjoy that much, which is from Islay. And Islay whiskies they're very peated, so you imagine it's kind of like TCP for me. It's a bit sort of like but everybody loves it, so it's fine. Anyway, so he produced this bottle of Culila, and I was like, oh no, I don't really like peated whiskey, actually, because we were so cold and we were so wet, and we were in such a smoky environment. It was absolutely like nectar. It was perfect. So I think that the right environment for where you're drinking, it's like if you're having a cup of hot chocolate, would you rather have it wrapped up by the fire on top of a snowy mountain or on a hot beach? And it's the same with all the different types of whiskies. There are whiskies that are better before dinner or after dinner. But generally speaking, if I had to really sort of, there's a distillery called Glengarry near Aberdeen, and their whiskies, they're a bit sort of Christmas cakey and quite sort of sweet and fruity, and that would probably be the one I would pick if I had to pick a whiskey.
Well, I'm going to leave people with that lovely image of Christmas and berries and warm fires, and I'm just going to end it there and say thank you so much for coming on the podcast, and it's been so lovely and really, really informative. I've thoroughly enjoyed myself, and I hope you have too.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been absolutely lovely talking to you, and hope to speak to you again soon.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Vicky. Wow, I really think we covered it all in today's podcast. If you'd like to visit any of the distilleries Vicky mentioned, head to our website www.lowseasontraveller.com. I just want to say a massive thank you to all our listeners across the world. Please keep interacting with us. We love hearing from you. Remember, it's at Low Season Traveller on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter and LinkedIn. Be sure to catch Kate Burgess next week as she explores Vietnam. But for now, thank you for listening. And remember, Low Season Traveller, experience the world without the crowds.